the occasion was The Hobbit had come out. It's very popular. And the Natural History Museum there in Oxford, they had this kind of Christmas, New Year's lecture series. Christmas Lectures for Children, 1937, 1938. And Tolkien gets, his talk is on dragons, Saturday, January 1st, 1938. Kids in the audience, parents too. Here's a few lines from the lecture discussing dragons. Greed and hatred inspired them. And how can you withstand a dragon's flame and his venom and his terrible will and malice and his great strength? How can you pierce his armor? I really don't know, but it has been done. It needs, first of all, courage. First of all, courage. And then he goes on, dragons can only be defeated by brave men, usually alone. Sometimes a faithful friend may help, but it's rare. Friends have a way of deserting you when a dragon comes. Now, there's a lot to think about. Friends have a way of deserting you when a dragon comes. Dragons are the final test of heroes. So he is captivated by this idea of radical evil exists. We must resist it, and that's going to take courage. And I don't think it's an accident, Joe. He delivers this in 1938. We're already seeing the rise of these totalitarian states in Europe, and they are threatening world peace.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's ADYTONPBC.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're opening up the Green Notebook of historian and author, Dr. Joseph Loconte. Dr. Loconte is the author of The War for Middle-earth, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis Confront the Gathering Storm, 1930 to 1935. In this book, he explores how two Oxford professors, both veterans of the First World War, used myth, faith, and imagination to push back against the rising darkness of their time. As totalitarian regimes spread across Europe, Tolkien and Lewis responded not with politics or propaganda, but with stories that rekindled courage, friendship, and moral clarity in an age of disillusionment. In this conversation, we explore themes at the heart of cultural and moral leadership. How the trauma of World War I shaped Tolkien and Lewis' understanding of good and evil. Why their friendship became a creative alliance and a quiet act of resistance. What their writings can teach us about confronting power, propaganda, and despair, and how The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Chronicles of Narnia still call us to courage in our own age of confusion. Dr. Loconte challenges us to see that leadership isn't about strategy or position. It's about imagination, conviction, and the courage to stand in the breach when the world loses its way. His insights will remind us that faith and creativity can be powerful weapons in the fight against cynicism and fear. So whether you're leading a team, shaping culture, or simply trying to live with integrity in difficult times, this episode will help you rediscover the kind of hope that builds endurance and the kind of heroism that begins in the ordinary. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome one of my favorite guests in the last 160-something episodes, Dr. Joseph Loconte.
Joe, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
I was trying to figure out the word or the adjective to describe the feeling when I was reading The War for Middle-earth. And I think I came up to it. So I read a lot, obviously. And, some books I read and I feel smarter afterwards, or I'm like, the writing was beautiful, it's something like that. But when as I was reading and when I finished The War for Middle-earth, I guess like the one way I could describe it was like, I felt like my soul filled up inside,
Wow.
reading it. And
Wow.
I think it's the story you tell and what these two guys use their gifts for, that you do a wonderful job of describing.
Wow. Joe, I don't know what to say. I'm going to hold on to that phrase, your soul filled up inside. I'm going to pull that out on a rainy day. So the grace of God, it's a tribute to these two authors that they have that effect on us, don't they?
Yeah. And like we were talking before on our phone call, a couple of years ago for Christmas, my wife gave me the gift of A Hobbit, A Wardrobe, and A Great War. And so I'd read that one. But for our listeners, before we dive into The War for Middle-earth, could you talk just about your previous book and the experiences both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien had in the First World War?
Yeah, very briefly, Joe. Thank you for that. I never intended to write a book about Tolkien and Lewis, but it kind of came to me while I was teaching my Western civilization class at the King's College there in New York City, and understanding for the first time how devastating the First World War was to the Europeans. Not so much to the Americans, because as my British friends like to say, we came into that war late, we suffered the least, and we came out the strongest, right? But for Tolkien and Lewis, it was a very different experience. Tolkien, as you know, Joe, he fought at the Battle of the Somme. And the opening day of the Battle of the Somme is still the bloodiest day in British military history. About 20,000 soldiers died on a single day. Tolkien was not there on July 1st, 1916, but he was there for the rest of the fight. And he lost most of his closest friends in that battle. And, he began writing bits and pieces of what's going to become his legendarium for Middle-earth. I mean, the fall of Gondolin, he is writing by his own description while he's in the trenches. So, war is on his mind, and he's kind of working out some of this, even when he's a young 20-something-year-old second lieutenant there in the trenches in France. For C.S. Lewis, it's a devastating experience, I think. Lewis goes into the First World War as an atheist. He is literally an atheist in a foxhole. And he comes out as an atheist. And I think I have a collection, he's writing some of his poetry, Spirits in Bondage. And I'll just read you a quick line here, Joe, from Spirits of Bondage, which he produced really either in the trenches or while he's in a hospital bed. And here's the first few lines from one of the poems, De Profundis. Come, let us curse our master ere we die, for all our hopes in endless ruin lie. The good is dead, let us curse God most high. That's C.S. Lewis in 1918, 1919. So the war has a devastating psychological impact on their generation. Tolkien's Catholic faith is intact. Lewis's atheism deepens, and yet I think it helps to send him on a spiritual quest.
You said that you said that Lewis may have written that in a hospital bed. What happened to him?
Great question. Lewis, also a second lieutenant there in France, and a mortar shell goes off, explodes close to him, destroys, obliterates his sergeant. He is wounded. Shrapnel hits him in 3 different places in his body. He thinks he's going to die, but he survives. And it's probably the best thing that could have happened to him, because the attrition rate for second lieutenants there in Great Britain was about 1 in 4 are going to be gone, of the second lieutenants, gone. So he's sent into a hospital there in France, eventually makes his way to England. And he'll carry bits of metal in his body for years afterwards. But it is a profoundly difficult and painful experience for both men, because they lose most of their closest friends, will perish in the First World War. And I think, Joe, if we have that expression, the shell-shocked veteran, shell-shocked, because of this unique experience of mortar shells, high explosives in a trench for hours at a time. Men had never had that experience before. We had no mental category for it. And so it created all kinds of psychological trauma for so many men after the war. So you could argue that, we'll get into this, our discussion, I'm sure, but the 1920s generation, particularly in Europe, you could argue that the shell-shocked veteran is kind of a walking metaphor for the emotional outlook of that generation of the 1920s and 1930s.
Yeah, there's a great book. I think I'm getting the title right. It's called Voices from the Front, by a guy named Hart. And he was a British historian. He took oral histories from the World War I vets. And then, sometime years and years later, decided to compile these into an overall narrative. And you have war breaking out. You have people literally running to recruiting stations in London because they're so excited to be involved in this. And then just the experience itself, like you were talking about the Battle of the Somme, like where guys would see a horse cart going by and they would start doing the calculations. If I throw my leg under it, and get in its path, can I quickly get back home? And then like you said, you were talking about this metaphor. It like the book ends with all this sour, dour outlook on war for all these young men that survived and came out. And so you have this entire generation that lost their lives. And so this is where like the Hemingways and all these writers are coming out.
Farewell to Arms, right. All Quiet on the Western Front, the anti-war literature in the post-World War I years. Absolutely right, Joe. Yeah.
And so there's this, it's almost like, what's the point anymore? There's no such thing as the hero is dead coming out of World War I. And so that happens. And then can you talk about the political environment now that as Tolkien and Lewis are, getting established at Oxford and coming into to writing?
Yeah, just some quick time frame here. These guys survived the war. They both returned to Oxford in the same year, in 1925, as instructors in English language and literature. They don't meet until 1926. But things are starting to happen in the 1920s. The first installment of Hitler's Mein Kampf appears in the bookstores in Germany in 1925. I mean, think about that. He's not yet a political player in Germany, but Mussolini is in Italy, because he's taken over the government in Italy in 1922. Is the emergence of the fascist movement, the first fascist party, the overthrow of any kind of constitutional government in Italy. And just personal biography here, Joe. My grandfather, Giuseppe Aiello, for whom I'm named Joseph Giuseppe, he was 16 years old. He left Italy in 1921, a year before Mussolini came into power. Good timing, grandpa, exactly. But that was true of a lot of Italians, because the Italians had suffered grievously in the First World War. 500,000 Italian men are dead. Italy is on the winning side of that conflict. They were on the Allied side, and yet the disillusionment, and that's really kind of the buzzword in the air, the disillusionment with capitalism, with democracy, with liberal democracy, and with religion, because so many ministers had blessed the war and turned it into a holy war almost, right? So this disillusionment. And what does it do, Joe? It just opens up the door now to these new ideologies as an alternative to liberal democracy, fascism, communism, totalitarianism.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy for us now to look back on that period and be like, well, why couldn't they see that Hitler was bad or that Mussolini was taking the country into a horrible place? And one of the things I love doing is reading things that were from that period, and it wasn't obvious. Like I was reading there's a book called oh man, it's right over here. I believe it's called In the Circles of Power, but it's written by Churchill's secretary. And he's talking about how people are still debating what's actually happening in Germany, if it's all propaganda for people trying to get back into a war, or if Hitler's actually doing something with the Jewish people. And so anyways, and then there's another great book called In the Garden of Beasts that Eric Larson did about the U.S. ambassador to Berlin. And he's seeing all this stuff happening and sending cables back to the State Department. And people aren't really believing him either. You know, they're like, these got the Nazi party coming to power in Germany. They're not going to last long. Like there's no way that their ideas are going to be going from fringe to mainstream. And so it's really interesting that Lewis and Tolkien were watching all of this, and they were almost like the Old Testament prophets, like this is not good. Like, but everybody's marching along to really like the gathering storm of World War II.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there is a prophetic edge, I think, to both these men, which we'll get into. But I think also, just to supplement what you said here, Joe, I think it's hard for us to imagine how anxious the Europeans were in those post-war years about these different ideologies and the possibility of another war. It's the last thing anyone wanted when you get into the 1930s. So one of the questions I think we tend to have as Americans, how did Hitler and the fascists, Mussolini, how did they get such a stronghold in their countries? Well, one of the reasons is communism and the threat of communism, because what the communists were doing in the Soviet Union, they're seizing property and they're initiating things like man-made famines and civil wars. And so the devastation that went on in the Soviet Union in the early 20s and then in the early 1930s again under Stalin, that is scaring the stuffing out of the Europeans. And so when Hitler comes, his first speech in 1933 when he's chancellor is, "I am what stands between you and the communists. I will defend Christian values, and we will defeat the communists in the streets." And that resonates with many, many people, particularly religious leaders, Catholics and Protestants both. The last thing they want to see is the communists seize power. Mussolini is making the same kind of arguments. He is what stands between Italy and a communist takeover. So that's important for Americans to understand. There was real evil and disaster associated with the Soviet Union and communism. And here come the fascists saying, "We'll defend you against that." There's a lesson.
Yeah, and I think like you even have quotes in your book, I think from the Pope at the time, and even like you said, bishops and clergy who were putting out public statements in support of Hitler's policies and of Mussolini's conquest. I mean, it's just, I think it's hard for us to imagine now looking back, but the mindset of just the common German or the common Italian during this time.
Yes. You've got these political leaders who are essentially offering a substitute to religion, and the state will be the substitute. And that's what we mean by the expression political religions. I mean, look how Mussolini defines totalitarianism. I think I've got it here handy. Yeah. This is Mussolini's definition of the totalitarian state, and he's open about it. The fascist conception of the state is all-embracing. Outside of it, no human or spiritual values can exist, much less have value. This understood, fascism is totalitarianism, and the fascist state, a synthesis, a unit inclusive of all views, interprets, develops, and potentiates the whole life of a people. It gives you power. You will have power and you will have meaning and significance within the state. Wow. He just says it. And in the 1930s, that's an attractive alternative to what the other alternatives look like.
Yeah, and I was listening to an interview you did with somebody else, and they pointed out that, this is a difference between if this was happening now, the First World War finishing in 2005.
That's right.
So I think anybody listening to this podcast has a ton of memories from 2005.
Yes.
And so the war was so fresh in the
Yes.
minds of everyone, and they just
Yes.
wanted something better, and Hitler and Mussolini offered hope.
That's
and
right.
That's where people were heading towards during this period of time that you discuss in the book.
That's right. And now let's take it to Tolkien and Lewis here, Joe, how these guys, they are watching what's happening. They have a ringside seat in the 1930s. And the more dire the situation becomes, and this is what I'm trying to unpack in the book, is this threat of radical evil. It's there in the world. And I think they are deliberately pushing back through their writings, and we can get into it, starting with The Hobbit, starting with the story of the Hobbits. We're encountering real radical evil with the goblins. You just see it. And then it becomes even darker and much more mature and full-bodied, of course, in The Lord of the Rings. And Lewis will do the same in his works. But I want to give you a chance to respond and take this where you want it to go. But a lot we could say.
Yeah, there's a lot we could say. And, one of the things that you do a good job, and I'll just tell you, everybody, like I was texting Joe back and forth and before we recorded this podcast, and I have ordered so many books and I've read so many documents that I was able to find on the internet based off the stuff that you cite. But Tolkien and Lewis were both grounded in history and literature.
Yes.
And in a speech that Lewis gave that you quote in the book, it was called Learning in Wartime. He gave it at a church in 1939.
Yes.
He talks about, like, you have to know history, not because the past is magical, but because it allows you to kind of understand things that are happening in the present and not get like swept away by the latest fad and the latest demagogue.
Yes.
And so what were some of the books that you know of that Lewis and Tolkien read that really grounded them, you think, during this period?
Fabulous question, Joe. And this needs more attention, I think, for us, because we tend not to pay attention to this great classical medieval Christian inheritance that we have in the Western tradition. But that is what Lewis is talking about in that amazing talk, Learning in Wartime. It's in 1939 that he delivers that talk. And there's a line in there, Joe, you just about got to it. The line where he says, I'll paraphrase, but it's pretty close. We need perhaps most of all intimate knowledge of the past, because it helps to inoculate us from the great cataract of nonsense that pours from the press and the microphone of our age. It's 1939, the cataract of nonsense. Well, here we are, friend. But the great literature that was such a moral and spiritual grounding for them. I think about Homer, Virgil, Dante, Milton, and we can add to that list certainly. But I think there were two works in particular that were of special importance to both these men. For Tolkien, it's Beowulf. It's the story of this medieval hero who goes against radical evil. Grendel's mother, another monster, and then a fearsome dragon. He goes out to meet evil. He doesn't wait for the evil to meet him. And we'll get into a little bit more in Beowulf and why that's so significant to Tolkien. But for Lewis said that outside of the Bible, he was actually asked at some point to list the books that had the most influence on his professional life. And I believe that Virgil's Aeneid was either at the very top or it was certainly very close to the top. I think it was probably the most important book outside of the Bible on Lewis's professional life, the Aeneid. So what is the Aeneid? It's the founding myth of ancient Rome. Aeneas is this heroic figure who takes on this great quest of establishing a new civilization. And he doesn't quite want to do it. He'd rather stay in Troy, but he has this mission and this calling, and he's going to be faithful to it. And he shows incredible resilience and courage and strength in that process. So these works, they are central to these men and their understanding of what heroism is.
Yeah. So what would they have said about, like we were talking earlier, we were saying the heroes are dead in this period. What would they have said about heroes?
Well, it's a fabulous question. And how much time have we got?
as long as you give me today.
Well, let's say a couple of things first before we get into what they said about heroism. Let's remember how anti-heroic the mood was in the 1920s and 30s. We've alluded to it, Joe. It was almost pathological in its anti-heroism. So think T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. Think Eric Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front. The idea of the individual acting in some noble, brave, heroic way for a great cause, that has gone to the dogs. That's not where literature is in the 1920s and 30s. The literary movement that has taken people by storm is the modernist movement. And it's deeply anti-heroic. It emphasizes the irrational, the fragmentation of the individual personality. It's a dehumanizing kind of literary movement. And Tolkien and Lewis they're appalled by it. So, Joe, there's this wonderful moment in 1936 where they're discussing literature. And I'm sure they have the modernist literature in their minds. Lewis turns to Tolkien. His nickname for Tolkien was Tollers. And he says, well, Tollers, if they're not going to write the kinds of books we want to read, we're going to have to write them ourselves. And they have this literary pact. Tolkien is supposed to write a time travel story. Lewis is going to write a space travel story. But both of their stories are going to have this heroic element, to your point, and they're also going to have kind of a mythic quality to them. They're going to reintroduce the idea of heroism for the modern mind. Tolkien will start his time travel. He never finishes it, but he'll publish The Hobbit in 1937. And then pretty soon, almost immediately, he starts writing The Lord of the Rings. Lewis will write, in response to that pact, that literary pact, he writes Out of the Silent Planet. And the hero is Ransom, this amazing heroic figure, but not like the modern heroes that we have now in the 21st century who kind of prevail through their own physical strength and, of course, loaded up with lots of superpower weapons, right? These are not the heroes these guys are writing about. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, like there's a scene you talk about in the book, and I was like kind of picturing it. It's I guess it's like a talk or like some sort of one-day event, and Tolkien gets asked to talk to these kids about dragons. And in reading it, I'm picturing all these kids sitting down, legs crossed, looking up at the speaker.
Yes.
All the parents in the back of the room being like, okay, whatever. You kids learn about this thing. I'm taking you here to get away for a day.
Yes.
And then Tolkien starts speaking. And while he's talking to the kids, he's simultaneously talking to their moms and dads in the back of the room.
Yes.
And I just, if you remember it from the book, that'd be great. But just kind of talking about what his talk was about and why again, this focus on heroism.
Yes. Joe, thank you so much for asking me that question, because it's a talk that he gave that even a lot of Tolkien biographers don't know about or don't spend any time with. But I think it's really important. And it's really hard to track this talk down. I think it may be in one collection in a book that appeared like in the 1970s. I had to go to the Bodleian Library at Oxford and sit there and type out as much as I could because you can't make photocopies. And I did. I got a lot of it down, but I'll read you a few lines. And the occasion was The Hobbit had come out. It's very popular. And the Natural History Museum there in Oxford, they had this kind of Christmas, New Year's lecture series. Christmas Lectures for Children, 1937, 1938. And Tolkien his talk is on dragons, Saturday, January 1st, 1938. Kids in the audience, parents too. Here's a few lines from the lecture. discussing dragons. Greed and hatred inspired them. And how can you withstand a dragon's flame and his venom and his terrible will and malice and his great strength? How can you pierce his armor? I really don't know, but it has been done. It needs, first of all, courage. First of all, courage. And then he goes on, dragons can only be defeated by brave men, usually alone. Sometimes a faithful friend may help, but it's rare. Friends have a way of deserting you when a dragon comes. Now, there's a lot to think about. Friends have a way of deserting you when a dragon comes. Dragons are the final test of heroes. So he is captivated by this idea of radical evil exists. We must resist it, and that's going to take courage. And I don't think it's an accident, Joe. He delivers this in 1938. We're already seeing the rise of these totalitarian states in Europe, and they are threatening world peace.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. I think, again, the point of it's the dragon is the ultimate test. It's this thing that you're not sure if you can that you can defeat. And,
Yes.
going back to Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, as I was reading that and reading Greek mythology, when I can't think of their name. It was Hermes and another god gave Perseus the tools to kill the dragon, to kill Medusa. They say, like, take this shield and take this sword. We hope it tips you this. We hope this tips the odds in your favor, but we can't do it for you.
Oh.
And so it was Perseus that had to go by himself to ultimately slay. And it's this theme that keeps coming up again and again and again.
Yes.
The courage that's needed, that individual courage.
Yes.
And again, I love the environment that Tolkien said that in, because that's exactly what was needed in the moment.
Yes. And I think it's really important for especially the American audience, to understand Britain, once the war starts from 1939 right to the end of 1941, Britain is alone. And if you think about the culture in Europe, the culture in Britain, they don't want another war. And it's not clear to Lewis and Tolkien that the English people are going to have the resilience, the kind of courage that's needed to face this gathering storm. Winston Churchill will do amazing work from his position as prime minister in shoring up the martial resolve, the martial strength of the British people. He'll perform the political task, but there's a cultural task as well. And I think that's what Tolkien and Lewis are doing through their imaginative works, not as propagandists, but they know through imaginative literature, they can help to summon the moral imagination and help people to understand, heroism is necessary. We're called to it. And by God, right now, we need it. From 1939 to 1941, especially, Britain is alone. America is on the sidelines. Britain is under attack. I mean, Joe, I don't think we Americans have asked ourselves the questions, how did the British people manage, not just with the Battle of Britain, but then during the Blitz on London, 76 consecutive nights, save one, of aerial bombardment on the city of London. I was in Washington, D.C. on the 9/11 attacks. I cannot imagine Washingtonians or New Yorkers going back to work every day for 76 9/11 attacks, but the British people did. They went back to work. They found that courage and strength and resilience. Winston Churchill was a huge part of the reason, but I think in their own way, Lewis and Tolkien, they've established a beachhead of resistance over there at Oxford as well.
Well, speaking of that beachhead, how important was their friendship to each other, not just to each other, but to the works that they ended up producing during this period?
Yeah, that's an incredibly important question. There have been a number of books over the years that have looked at their friendship and have done a terrific job with it. What I'm kind of doing in my book is I'm really placing that friendship in the context of World War II, because I think there's a special urgency now to seek each other out. They had become friends as early as the 1920s. Tolkien is instrumental in helping Lewis to become a Christian, what we now regard as that famous walk and talk on Addison's Walk at Oxford in 1931, when Tolkien helps to open up Lewis's mind to the meaning of myth and Christianity as like an ancient myth, like a pagan myth, but the myth that became fact. the God-man Jesus comes to earth, dies for our sins, and comes back to life, the myth that became fact. That opens up Lewis's mind, leads pretty quickly to his Christian conversion. And that friendship deepens throughout the 1930s. But now, once the war starts, Joe, you can really see these men feel it's like they have to keep meeting together. And they meet one-on-one, the two of them, and also they form a larger association of like-minded Christian authors, the Inklings, who meet weekly in Lewis's rooms in Magdalen. But the importance of it can hardly be overstated, because Tolkien read out loud to Lewis virtually every chapter of The Lord of the Rings as he wrote it. And Lewis, as Tolkien said, was for a time his only audience. You know, give me more dollars, give me more.
Yeah,
wow.
And as you write in the book, like, Tolkien didn't go into The Hobbit with this idea of writing The Hobbit, then following it up with a trilogy.
Right.
Like, he was done writing on Hobbits.
Yeah, he told his publisher. His publisher, of course, wants a sequel, as publishers do when you have a successful book. And Tolkien writes to his publisher and says, I have nothing more to say about hobbits. So that's crucial. Tolkien will help Lewis to find a publisher for his first book, Out of the Silent Planet. And that becomes a turning point in Lewis's life, because he realizes, I think there are about somehow maybe 60 or so reviews of Out of the Silent Planet, book reviews. And they were mostly favorable, but he realized that maybe only 2 of the 60 realized that he's telling a story about the fall, the doctrine of the fall, and the problem of evil. This very literate British literary audience has no biblical literacy. They don't realize the book is about the fall. And the light goes off in his brain, in Lewis's brain, wow, if I had more talent and time, this could lead to the evangelization of England. We can smuggle in spiritual truth through great storytelling. So that's how the two were mutually encouraging to each other. They saw the need. They saw the cultural and spiritual need. And in their own way, in their own unique way, they were going to try to meet that need through their writing.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, 0 account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. I think that's an important point too, is they saw a need. There's a quote in your book too by Lewis, and I'm going to mess it up, but essentially it says that, when you follow your vocation, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's really going to be hard, but it's going to be much harder if you don't follow it, if you ignore your calling and your vocation.
Yes.
And so these two men, with, going back to that pact they made, and I think you said it was 33 of,
1936, their literary pact. Yeah.
Yeah. Is they fought using their special gifts. Like, they showed courage using the gifts that they were given to do so. Like, they didn't go on, to be activists. They didn't put on helmets and go fight. I know that Tolkien helped a little bit with cryptology, but like, they used the gifts that they had to do what they felt needed to be done. And I think that's just an important lesson for anybody reading this book. Yeah,
it's crucial, Joe. And think about this. The Second World War, they're both men are too old to serve in the military, but they do their bit, as the Brits say, for king and country, in that they're part of the home guard, right? And Lewis is taking in children, he and his brother Warney and Mrs. Moore in their household, they're bringing in these evacuee children because the children are coming in by the thousands from London trying to find safe harbor. And that, of course, transforms Lewis's life. He's around these little children for the first time. He doesn't even like children. But that will help give him the spark for the whole idea for the Chronicles of Narnia, as he himself will say. Yeah, they are deciding that they're going to push back against the ideological madness of their age. So there's the war on the battlefield, Joe, but there's also the war of ideas. Modernism, fascism, communism, eugenics, totalitarianism. It's profoundly dehumanizing. And they're going to reaffirm our humanity, our God-given dignity and humanity, a transcendent moral order amid the chaos. It's very deliberate what these men are going to do. And I think that they really do form a beachhead of resistance in that place in Oxford. But think about it. They have no idea where their writing is going to go. I mean, they write because they have to write. They're not trying to be revolutionaries, but they're just trying to do their bit, what they can. And here we are talking about their works 75, 80 years later. Wow.
That's amazing. And you mentioned, real quick for our listeners, you mentioned eugenics. Could you just explain what that was at the time?
Yeah. The whole eugenics idea, which came out of, you could argue there's a linkage to Darwin and then social Darwinism with Spencer, the idea we can improve the human stock, the gene pool. And the way you improve the gene pool is a couple of ways. You prevent certain types of people from marrying. You might prevent interracial marriage, for example, but then you'll use sterilization techniques. Sterilize those people who you think are not up to speed. They're somehow unfit. They're somehow not quite normal, maybe not physically normal or mentally slow. We're going to sterilize them so they can't have more children. So the shocking Supreme Court decision in the 1920s, led by progressives, we have to say, Oliver Wendell Holmes, he says in approving sterilization against Carrie Buck, the Buck versus Bell case, his infamous line is, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. That's progressivism in the 1920s, eugenics. And it's taken off in the 1920s because there's this idea that, there must be something wrong with the human stock. Look what we've done to each other in the First World War. And of course, the fascists then will run with that concept in a huge way, race-based political ideology. What stops eugenics? I mean, think about it, Joe. Half the states in the United States passed mandatory sterilization laws throughout the 1920s. It's not just in Germany. We were actually at it before the Germans were. So it's stunning to think about and deeply troubling, isn't it, to think about that we thought this was a solution to our social problems, sterilize the unfit, quote unquote.
And again, this is why I love, going back and reading things that were of that period.
Yeah.
And because again, like we can't even fathom that today, that would be something that they would do back then.
Yes.
But at the time, like that was the cataract of nonsense
backed by the scientific community. Go ahead, Joe.
And in 75 years from now, I'm sure that 2 guys like you and I are going to have a conversation on a podcast or whatever they do in the future. And they're going to be talking about some sort of cataract of nonsense.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
That people could have, formed a beachhead against
that's right.
Guys like Tolkien and guys like Lewis.
That's right. And that's where, back to the earlier point, Joe, that's why having a grounding in the classical Christian literary and political tradition is a huge help. Because we can have a conversation with the past. The past can speak into the present and help to undeceive us, help to pierce through that cataract of nonsense, because we can realize, we've kind of been down that road before. We've kind of tried that ideology. How did that turn out?
Yes, not that well. Well, one of the things too, that I would love to touch on is the fact that like when we think writers, like we think people just sit around and writing all the time. Like Hemingway would drink in cafes, whatever, in Paris, and then he'd go write. And he was like a man of leisure. But when we're talking Tolkien and Lewis, these guys were pretty busy, weren't they?
Oh gosh, think about it, especially during the war. And having been and serving as a professor myself, as an academic, you're caught up in faculty meetings, which you never want to go to, battling faculty meetings. You have to prepare lectures for your students. You've got to be engaged with your students in their work, teaching tutorials, grading papers. And they were taking on extra work, extra grading, just to pay the bills. And then the war comes. And now they're being asked to develop new kinds of short courses for men going off to war. Lewis is being asked to talk to the young men in the British Royal Air Force, the RAF. And when he's asked to do that, with all of his existing responsibilities, he says, I'll do that. And he goes, every week, he's on a train for 2 or 3 days, traveling in English countryside, talking to these young men, the RAF, knowing that after about 10 missions or so, they're going to be gone. So think about that sort of responsibility. And both men are taking these evacuee children into their homes and trying to care for them and give them some help. So you ask yourself, well, when exactly were they writing their great epic works, Joe? Because they weren't getting paid to do that. They weren't getting paid to do that. So when are they doing it? They're stealing away time in the evenings, on the weekends, whenever they can, because they have to write. They just have to. It's part of their calling, and they're going to do it. And so under the pressure of all the responsibilities, the people that they're responsible for, that they're caring for, all the other work responsibilities, they are finding time to write these imaginative, creative, epic works that have just spoke to their generation and continue to speak to generations around the world.
Yeah, and there were times when Tolkien was writing the Lord of the Rings book that he was struggling with just trying to finish it with everything going on, right?
Yes. Oh, huge. Let me just tell one story if I could.
Yes.
It's in 1942. And in the early part of 1942, Joe, I think Americans, we tend to forget this. We think, well, Pearl Harbor, December 1941, America's in the war now, everything's fine. No, it's not, because we're totally unprepared for war, because we've been in an isolationist mood. We are not militarily prepared. The United States and Great Britain are getting the stuffing kicked out of them by the Japanese in Asia. Everything's going wrong. Thousands of people, soldiers, are having to surrender. Germany in 1941-42 controls all of Central and Western Europe. The Soviet Union, of course, is working all of its mischief in Eastern Europe. So it really looks like in the early part of 1942 that totalitarianism is on the winning side of history, and liberal democracy is going to be defeated. That is really how it looks in the early part of 1942. Tolkien is struggling with The Lord of the Rings. He hasn't worked on it for months, and he's in kind of an emotional, dark place, it seems. He's struggling. And then he says, he kind of wakes up one morning, and there's a short story, just in his head, fully formed. And he writes it out in a matter of hours. And the name of the story is Leaf by Niggle. Leaf by Niggle. Niggle is an artist trying to paint a great tree, a beautiful tree, and he keeps getting interrupted, and he can't finish it, and he's afraid he's never going to finish it. And then he's kind of taken away, and he has to face his own mortality and the purpose of his own life. Tolkien is 50 years old in 1942. I think he's having a bit of a midlife crisis, wondering, am I going to finish my great work, The Lord of the Rings? And his daughter Priscilla will comment on this wonderful short story, Leaf by Niggle, and how it's a spiritual journey for his father, and struggling with his commitments to people, his commitments to his calling and his vocation, and he's working it out in that short story. It's a beautiful short story, and it helps to get him back on track, along with C.S. Lewis demanding more of The Lord of the Rings.
That was another, there's another collection out there where when I got to this portion of your book that I had to put it down for a minute, go on Amazon and try to find where I could buy this short story along with some other ones. So that's another one. Hopefully it'll be here as soon as we get done with this interview. And I think that for that point right there, going back to Lewis's speech, Learning in Wartime in the church, he says there's 3 enemies to the scholar. And the first one he says is excitement. that you get really caught up in
Yes.
everything that's happening in the world.
Yeah, the
And
news.
I couldn't help but think, man, like how many times a day are there breaking news? How many times a day do I tend to pick up my phone, jump on social media, and
Yeah.
look at all the horrible things happening? And it actually takes me away from what I'm doing. The second
Yes.
one he said was frustration. Am I ever going to finish? And like you said,
Yes.
during this time, like it was looking like the bad guys were going to win in the
Yes.
end. And then the final point he makes is
Fear. Right.
fear of death.
The
And
fear of death.
so um again, I think if Tolkien and Lewis can see out their vocation, see
Yes.
out their calling in the midst of World War II with
Yes.
all these other duties that they had, I think that if there's something that we are called to do, I think
Yes.
we can find the time to do it as well.
Yes. Absolutely right, Joe. I'm so glad you brought up this essay. Let me just find a couple lines there from Learning in Wartime, if I can find it. Otherwise, I'll have to quote it from memory. It's about this idea of waiting, trying to wait for the conditions to be ideal before we get down to our work, right? Oh yeah, here are the lines. He says, there are always plenty of rivals to our work. We're always falling in love or quarreling, looking for jobs, fearing to lose them, getting ill and recovering, following public affairs. If we let ourselves, we shall always be waiting for some distraction or other to end before we can really get down to our work. The only people who achieve much are those who want knowledge so badly that they seek it while the conditions are still unfavorable. Favorable conditions never come. If I could give advice to young people, any one piece of advice, that would be it. Don't wait for favorable conditions. Get on with your calling now. Now.
Yes. And I like, just a lesson for me. I came up with this idea a couple weeks ago, was that we're too harsh on the present and too idealistic about the future. I remember thinking while I was in command, working 70 hours a week, like, oh, I wish I had more time to write.
Yeah.
And, I was able to do it. But then once I got out of the Army and retired, more things just popped up on my schedule. And so going back to Lewis's point, like there's
Yes.
only the time we're given, and that time is right now to do
Yes.
the thing that we're supposed to be doing.
Yes. What he says in that beautiful address, Learning in Wartime, and it's worth 100 sermons, I think, just to be honest, just between the two of us, worth 100 sermons. You remember, he's giving this address in 1939, Britain's at war, and the church is filled with anxious undergraduates. Why finish? Why do anything if I'm going to be called up into active service here, maybe in a month or two? And he's making the argument about we only have the present. And the phrase he uses, it's difficult for you young people to know how quickly one feels the shortness of the tether. The shortness of the tether. You're a young guy, Joe, but guys like me, boy, we feel it. We feel the shortness of the tether. We know the curtain's coming down, and we got to get on with it. Right.
Well, two final questions, Joe. First one is, you briefly mentioned it in the book. We haven't talked about it here. But I was really interested in the role Lewis's father played in getting him to where he was at.
Yeah.
And the faith he had in his son.
Yeah, I think for both those men, we can mention both actually, the roles that either a father or a father figure played in their lives. Let me just mention Tolkien first, and we'll get to Lewis, because Tolkien was an orphan at a pretty young age. His father died when he was very young. His mother died when he was a young teenager. But a Catholic priest, Father Francis, came along and mentored him and opened up his world and showed him unconditional love. And that was a decisive act of love and service to Tolkien. For Lewis, he had a strained relationship with his father, because when Lewis's mother died, his father didn't really know how to be there for his two sons. And yet, even with that somewhat distant relationship, his father was loyal to him and supporting him at every step, financially especially, where he really needed it, as he's trying to get into Oxford. And then when he's in Oxford, it's his father who's there helping him to stay afloat financially. And there's a really poignant moment. I'll try to quote it from memory, a couple of lines. Lewis writes to his father when he's gotten his first job at Oxford. It's arrived, right? And he talks about how grateful he is to his father for the support he's shown to him over the years. His father then, in his own, I think, in a journal entry, his father just says he fell on his knees and thanked the God of heaven for what's happened now with his son, that he's finding his way in life. It's such a poignant, personal moment between the two of them. Probably the best moment they had as father and son. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to finish that real quick because there's one line after that I was like, man, this is amazing, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up right now, and I can edit this out. But he goes on to say that he knows that his son is going to go on to write things that are worth fighting for.
Yes, if Oxford doesn't spoil him, I think his father says he will write something that men will not soon forget. Something like that is the line, right?
That men would not willingly let die.
Men will not willingly let die. Wow.
Yeah.
A prophecy about his sons. Isn't that amazing?
That's awesome. Okay, so that was question one. Question two, we talked about this before, but in both books, Chronicles of Narnia and The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Tolkien and Lewis both touch on this idea of power. They had seen, men take power in Italy, Russia, and Germany, and do terrible things with it.
Yes.
And so what do you think that they thought about power?
It's a fabulous question. How much time have you got, Joe, on this one?
As much time as you'll give me, Joe.
The will to power, that phrase comes from Nietzsche, the idea of the Superman, and that we're all, according to Nietzsche, we're just born craving power, and we'll do whatever we can to get it and to hang on to it. They have a ringside seat to the will to power and its political expression in fascism, communism, totalitarianism there in the 1930s and 40s. So it's not a surprise. It should not surprise us that the theme of power, the temptation to power, the corrupting nature of power, that this plays a large role. It's a huge theme in their works, in their great imaginative works. So think about it this way. When Tolkien published the Lord of the Rings, it comes out finally in the 1950s. I think he worked on it for 14 years. Starts writing it in 1937, right through the Second World War. Finally, it's published in the early 1950s. And because it's the atomic age, people assume that the ring is kind of a metaphor, for the atomic bomb. And Tolkien sets them straight. He says, of course, my story is not about atomic power, but about power exerted for domination. He literally tells us what the book is about. Power exerted for domination. And, if you read one of my favorite chapters in The Lord of the Rings, I won't be able to find it, I don't think. But in the Fellowship chapter 2, it's the Council of Elrond. The Council of Elrond, where they're discussing, what do we do? We have the ring, but we can't use it. We're going to have to destroy it. And the debate that goes on, because if we try to use it, we will become like Sauron. Well, friend, he's writing this. Tolkien is writing these chapters right through World War II. And it has to be playing on his imagination, using these destructive weapons of what will it do to us? And you see the same theme in Lewis's works as well. I think the Space Trilogy, take that hideous strength, which is the final book in the series, the use and abuse of science and the coercive power of the state to control the individual. It is horrifying. It's a horrifying novel. And he's writing it right through, the Second World War, 1944, 45.
That's amazing. What is one lesson, other than highlighting this period of time, that you want modern day readers to take from the War for Middle Earth?
Well, if I could maybe have a couple of lessons tucked into each other over here instead of just one, because they work here kind of in tandem. These men are very aware that there are dark forces in their world. Evil is a real force in us. The desire for power, self-absorption, selfishness, malice, all these things are in us, and they're in the world. There are real malevolent forces in the world. And we're going to be shaped by them. We have to get into the fight. We have to do our bit to push back against the darkness in whatever calling or vocation we occupy. There's a role we have to play in this great struggle against evil. But the related point to that, Joe, which is essential, is we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. It's not an accident that Tolkien calls his great epic story The Lord of the Rings, but it's the fellowship of the ring, which is so crucial. The fellowship, right? And Lewis's characters don't succeed on their own typically either. Certainly in the Chronicles of Narnia, it's the children working together with Aslan's allies. But then here's the third point, if I can make a third point, a third lesson. We cannot overcome evil on our own, even in a fellowship in a community of others, because the clear theme in both their major works is, and I'm quoting here from Tolkien, the sudden miraculous grace from outside of us that helps us to face the darkness and to overcome it. We can't overcome it on our own. Here's a spoiler alert for your audience. At the end of the day in The Lord of the Rings, Frodo doesn't quite succeed in his quest. He succeeds, but he doesn't. Right, Joe? What does he do at the end? He puts the ring back on his finger. The ring is mine. The ring is mine. And it's Gollum, this wicked creature, bent in upon himself, who bites Frodo's finger, and then falls into the crack of doom with the ring and destroys it that way. What Tolkien calls a sudden miraculous grace. Outside of Frodo, something intervenes. Same for the children in the Chronicles of Narnia. They don't overcome Tash and the dark powers on their own. They're rescued. They're rescued by Aslan in the inbreaking of Aslan and his kingdom. That's a deeply Christian message. So their idea of the heroic, it's not a modern idea. It's little hobbits, a mouse named Reapy-Cheep, little children up against the forces of darkness. They can't prevail on their own. They need help. They need grace from outside of themselves, the grace of God, ultimately, to confront and defeat the evil.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time today. This is equally as soul-filling as the book, the conversation with you today. And I appreciate it. And I also, my library appreciates it. The new books that'll hopefully be here this afternoon. And I really do. I told you this the other day. I really hope people read this. I think it's a good message in our current environment. And it brings us kind of back to old ways of doing things. And wow. I think it's something that a lot of people could use right now.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. It's been such a great pleasure to be with you. I think it's such a deeply encouraging story, the war for Middle-earth, and how these men, they were willing to stand in the gap, stand in the breach at a moment of absolute civilizational crisis, and they showed great cultural leadership as they did that. It's a tremendously encouraging story. So, Joe, great to be with you. Hope to come back.
All right, Joe. Looking forward to the next book.
Okay. Take care, friend.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law.